The Hermetic Principle. Have you ever noticed how one bad morning can seem to ruin an entire day? You spill coffee on your shirt, your phone battery dies, traffic feels slower than usual, and suddenly everything feels off. Nothing objectively terrible may have happened, but the whole day feels cursed. Then on another day, you wake up calm, focused, and oddly optimistic, and even small problems barely bother you. The outside world did not magically change overnight, yet your experience of it did. That strange connection between your inner state and the outer world is not just coincidence. It points to a very old idea that humans have been talking about for thousands of years. Most people go through life believing that their problems are purely external. They think their stress comes from work, their unhappiness comes from other people, and their lack of progress comes from bad luck or circumstances. So they spend most of their energy trying to fix the outside world while ignoring what is happening inside them. They change jobs, chase money, scroll endlessly or blame the system, yet somehow the same patterns keep repeating. New place, same frustration, new relationship, same arguments, new goal, same self-doubt. It feels confusing and unfair, and many people never stop to ask why this keeps happening. This is where an ancient Hermetic idea comes in, often summarized by the phrase, as above, so below. In simple terms, it means that patterns repeat across different levels of reality. What happens on the inside reflects on the outside, and what happens on the outside often mirrors what is happening within. Think of it like a reflection. Your thoughts, beliefs, and emotions form an inner world, and that inner world quietly shapes how you act, what you notice, and how you respond to life. Over time, those responses shape the results you get. The outside world then reflects that inner state back to you. This idea is not about magic or superstition. It is about patterns. When you feel confident inside, you tend to speak differently, make bolder choices, and notice opportunities instead of obstacles. When you feel fearful or resentful, you interpret neutral events as threats and miss chances right in front of you. The same world exists, but you experience a different version of it because your inner state acts like a filter. As above refers to the inner or higher level, while so below refers to the outer or visible level. They move together like two sides of the same coin. This matters because it gives you a sense of responsibility and power at the same time. If your outer life feels chaotic, it may be pointing to inner chaos. If your relationships feel tense, it may reflect unresolved tension inside you. If your goals feel impossible, it may mirror the limits you quietly believe in. The principle suggests that lasting change rarely starts outside. It starts with how you think, what you believe about yourself, and how you emotionally respond to life. When the inside changes, the outside often follows in surprising ways. You can see this principle clearly in everyday situations. Take two people who lose their jobs. One sees it as proof that life is unfair and that they are not good enough. They withdraw, complain, and stop trying. The other sees it as painful but temporary, a chance to reassess and grow. They update their skills, ask for help, and keep moving forward. Same event, completely different outcomes. The difference is not the job loss itself, but the inner story each person tells themselves, as above, so below. A well-known example comes from psychology through the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy. Researchers have shown that when people believe something strongly, they often behave in ways that make that belief come true. Teachers who believed certain students were gifted unknowingly gave them more attention and encouragement, and those students actually performed better over time. Nothing magical happened. The belief shaped behavior, behavior shaped results, and results reinforced the belief. The inner expectation created the outer reality. The Hermetic Principle invites you to pause and look inward when life feels stuck. Instead of only asking what is wrong out there, you can ask what pattern might be playing inside me. What belief am I carrying? What emotion keeps repeating? This is not about blaming yourself, but about understanding yourself. When you change the pattern above, the pattern below often has no choice but to shift as well. And sometimes that quiet inner shift is the most powerful change you can ever make. It is strange when you think about it, isn't it? If this stirred something in you, stay a little longer, because some of the most unsettling teachings are still ahead. And maybe, by the time this series ends, you will realize there was one truth we never spoke of. Not because it was lost to time, but because it was never meant to be written down, something meant to be noticed, not taught, as if the ancients whispered it across centuries, waiting for the one person who would finally recognize it. Maybe that person was you. The Law of Mentalism. Have you ever noticed how two people can wake up on the same morning, drink the same coffee, walk under the same sky, and yet live completely different days? One person says the coffee tastes terrible, the weather feels gloomy, and the world is out to get them. The other person takes a sip, smiles, and thinks today feels full of possibility. Nothing outside changed, yet everything felt different. That strange gap between what happens and how it feels is where our story begins. Most of us go through life believing that reality simply happens to us. We think our mood depends on circumstances, our confidence depends on results, and our happiness depends on what the world gives or takes away. When something goes wrong, we say the day was bad. When something goes right, we say we got lucky. What we often overlook is how much of our experience is shaped before events even unfold, quietly formed by expectations, beliefs, and inner stories we repeat without realizing it. This is where an old but powerful idea comes in, known as the Law of Mentalism. In simple terms, it says that reality is mind-created. That does not mean the world is fake, or that nothing exists outside your head. It means that the way you experience reality is filtered, colored, and shaped by your mind first. Your thoughts are not just reactions to life. They are active participants in how life shows up for you. Think of your mind like a pair of glasses. If the lenses are dark, everything looks gloomy. If the lenses are cracked, the world looks broken. The outside world stays the same, but your experience changes completely depending on what you are wearing on your face. The Law of Mentalism suggests that your thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions are those lenses. You are not seeing reality as it is. You are seeing reality as you are. This matters more than most people realize. Your mind influences how you interpret other people's actions, how you respond to challenges, and even how your body feels. If you believe you are bad at learning, every mistake feels like proof. If you believe people cannot be trusted, every delay feels like betrayal. On the other hand, if you believe growth is possible, mistakes feel like feedback. If you believe life is working with you, obstacles feel like puzzles instead of walls. You can see this play out in everyday situations. Two students take the same exam. One thinks, "I am terrible at tests," and feels anxious before even starting. The other thinks, "I prepared as best as I could," and stays calmer. Their minds set the tone long before the first question is answered. The law of mentalism is not saying thoughts magically erase difficulty. It is saying thoughts shape your response, and your response shapes your outcome. One of the most famous real-world examples of this idea comes from something called the placebo effect. In many medical studies, people are given pills with no active medicine at all. They are simply told that the pill will help them, and surprisingly, many of them do feel better. Pain decreases, symptoms improve. The body responds not to chemicals, but to belief. The mind sends signals that influence the body's behavior. This is not mysticism. It is well-documented science. What makes this even more fascinating is that the opposite also happens. When people believe something will harm them, their bodies can react negatively, even if nothing harmful is present. This shows that the mind does not just interpret reality, it helps construct the experience of it. The law of mentalism invites you to take responsibility, not blame. You are not at fault for everything that happens, but you do have influence over how it lives inside you. When you change your inner narrative, your outer experience often follows in subtle but powerful ways. Your thoughts guide your focus. Your focus shapes your emotions. Your emotions drive your actions, and your actions create your results. So the next time life feels heavy, instead of asking what is wrong with the world, try asking what story your mind is telling. Because reality may not begin where you think it does. It may begin quietly, invisibly, right behind your eyes. The Vedic concept of Maya. Have you ever bought something you really wanted, waited for it all week, finally opened the box, and then felt that quiet, awkward moment where you thought, "Oh, that is it"? The excitement fades faster than expected, and suddenly the thing that felt so important yesterday is already blending into the background of your life. We laugh about it, scroll on to the next thing, and repeat the cycle without really stopping to question why this keeps happening. It is funny, a little sad, and incredibly human. Most of us move through life chasing experiences, achievements, money, status, or approval, believing that once we get the next goal, things will finally feel complete. We tell ourselves that stress will disappear after graduation, after the promotion, after the relationship, or after the next big win. But somehow, even when we get what we wanted, the satisfaction never lasts. Another desire replaces it, another worry appears, and the feeling of fulfillment slips away again. we rarely pause to ask a deeper question. Why does life feel like a never-ending chase, even when we are doing everything right? This question sits at the heart of an ancient idea from Vedic philosophy known as Maya. In simple terms, Maya means illusion, but not illusion in the sense that nothing exists at all. It means that we mistake appearances for reality. According to this idea, the world we experience through our senses feels solid, permanent, and extremely important. Yet it is constantly changing. Our minds treat temporary things as if they are permanent, and that misunderstanding shapes almost everything we think, feel, and do. Think of Maya like wearing a very convincing pair of glasses. When you put them on, everything looks real and unquestionable. You react emotionally to what you see, even though the glasses are quietly distorting your view. In the same way, Maya causes us to identify too strongly with our thoughts, emotions, possessions, and social roles. We start believing that our job title is who we are, that our mistakes define us forever, and that our happiness depends entirely on external circumstances. This idea matters because it explains so much of our everyday stress. When we believe the illusion completely, every success feels fragile and every failure feels devastating. A bad comment online can ruin an entire day. A small setback can feel like a personal collapse. Under Maya, we forget that our thoughts come and go, our emotions rise and fall, and situations change whether we like it or not. The suffering does not come only from events themselves, but from how seriously and permanently we interpret them. You can see Maya at work in simple daily moments. A person checks their phone repeatedly, hoping for a message that will validate them. Another compares their life to carefully edited images online and feels like they are falling behind. Someone else ties their self-worth to productivity and feels anxious the moment they slow down. None of these experiences are fake, but the meaning we attach to them is shaped by illusion. A powerful way to understand this comes from a well-known comparison, often linked to ancient wisdom. Picture someone watching a movie. While the film is playing, they laugh, cry, feel fear, and feel joy. Their body reacts as if everything on the screen is real. But when the movie ends, they stand up and walk out of the theater, fully aware that none of it could truly harm or save them. Maya works like forgetting that you are watching a movie and believing you are inside it. Modern psychology unintentionally echoes this idea. Studies on mindfulness show that when people observe their thoughts instead of identifying with them, stress and anxiety decrease. The thoughts do not disappear, but the grip they have loosens. This mirrors the Vedic insight that freedom comes not from escaping the world, but from seeing it clearly. The Vedic concept of Maya does not say the world is worthless or meaningless. Instead, it invites us to engage with life while remembering that it is not the final truth. When we recognize illusion, we still work, love, dream, and create, but with less fear and less attachment. We stop expecting temporary things to give permanent satisfaction. In the end, Maya is not meant to depress us. It is meant to wake us up. When you realize that the chase never truly ends, You gain the option to step out of it, even for a moment. And sometimes that small shift in perspective is enough to bring a sense of peace that no purchase, promotion, or perfect moment ever could. Demiurge. Have you ever bought something brand new that looked amazing in the store, only to realize a few days later that it was cheaply made, frustrating to use, and somehow always working against you? The buttons feel wrong, the instructions make no sense, and no matter how carefully you use it, something always goes wrong. At some point, you stop blaming yourself and start wondering, who designed this thing? Was it really made by someone who cared, or by someone who just wanted it to work well enough? That feeling of living inside a badly designed system is something many people quietly relate to. People wake up, go to work, pay bills, deal with stress, sickness, unfair rules, and constant pressure, and they are told that this is just how life is supposed to be. If you struggle, it is your fault. If the world feels harsh, confusing, or even cruel, you are told to accept it. Most people never stop to question the structure itself. They assume the world is fundamentally good and perfectly ordered, and that any suffering must come from human mistakes alone. This is exactly where an ancient and controversial idea comes in. In early Gnostic traditions, which were spiritual movements that appeared around the first few centuries after Christ, there was a radical claim. They believed that the world was not created by the highest and true God. Instead, it was created by a lesser being called the Demiurge. According to Gnosticism, the true God was purely spiritual, loving, and beyond the physical universe. The Demiurge, on the other hand, was flawed, ignorant, or even arrogant. He created the material world but believed he was the ultimate God, even though he was not. In simple terms, Gnostics were saying this. The reason the world feels broken is because it actually is, not because existence itself is evil, but because the creator of the physical system was limited. In many Gnostic stories, the Demiurge traps spar a divine spirit inside human bodies. That divine spark is your true self, while the physical world acts like a kind of prison or maze that keeps you distracted, fearful, and obedient. This idea mattered deeply because it flipped the usual religious message upside down. Instead of saying, "Obey the system, and you will be rewarded later," Gnosticism said, "Wake up, and remember who you really are." Knowledge, or gnosis, was the key to freedom. Not blind belief, not fear, but awareness. When someone realizes that the rules of the world are not ultimate, they stop being controlled by them so easily. You can see why this idea still resonates today. Think about modern life, endless advertisements telling you that you are not enough, systems that reward greed over kindness, work environments that drain people emotionally while calling it productivity. Many people feel like they are playing a game where the rules are stacked against them. Gnosticism gave language to that feeling long before modern society existed. A powerful illustration of this idea appears in the ancient Gnostic text called the Apocryphon of John. In this story, the Demiurge declares that there is no God above him, but the text makes it clear that he is wrong. He is blind to the higher reality. This blindness explains why his world is full of suffering, contradiction, and decay. Humans suffer not because they are evil, but because they are trapped in a system designed by an ignorant ruler. Interestingly, this way of thinking echoes in modern stories too. Films like The Matrix use almost the same idea: a false world controlled by hidden rulers. Humans kept distracted while their true potential remains asleep. The solution is not violence, but awakening. Once someone sees the illusion loses its power. Whether you take Gnosticism literally or symbolically, its message hits close to home. It invites you to question authority, question systems, and question the idea that suffering is always your fault. It suggests that something deeper inside you cannot be owned, programmed, or fully controlled. And maybe that is why the idea of the Demiurge refuses to disappear. It speaks to anyone who has ever felt that the world does not quite make sense, and that somewhere beneath the noise, rules, and pressure, there is a truer version of themselves waiting to be remembered. The Emerald Tablet and Secret of Transmutation. Have you ever noticed how some days feel heavy for no clear reason? Like everything annoys you. Your coffee tastes wrong, your phone battery dies too fast, and even small problems feel massive. Then, on other days, nothing really changes on the outside, but somehow you feel lighter, calmer, and more capable. Same life, same problems, completely different experience. Most people brush this off as mood or luck. But what if there is a deeper pattern behind it? Something ancient that people have been talking about for thousands of years. Most of us grow up believing that change happens only on the outside. Better job, better grades, more money, better relationships. We chase upgrades like we are leveling up a character in a game. When things go wrong, we blame circumstances, other people, or bad timing. When things go right, we assume we got lucky. What we rarely question is the state we are in internally. We overlook how our thoughts, emotions, and habits quietly shape everything we experience. Because we cannot see them, we treat them as less real, even though they quietly run the show. This is where a mysterious ancient text called the Emerald Tablet comes in. It is short, symbolic, and often misunderstood, but its core idea is surprisingly simple. The Emerald Tablet is traditionally attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary figure associated with wisdom and knowledge. At its heart, the tablet talks about transformation, not just of metals like lead into gold, but of the human inner world. When it speaks of transmutation, it is really talking about the ability to change one state into another. Fear into confidence, confusion into clarity, chaos into order. It is less about magic tricks and more about understanding how change actually works. One of the most famous ideas from the Emerald Tablet is often summarized as the idea that what happens inside reflects what happens outside. In simple terms, your inner world shapes your outer world. If your thoughts are scattered, your life often feels scattered. If your emotions are constantly negative, opportunities seem to shrink. This does not mean thinking happy thoughts will magically solve everything, but it does mean that your internal state acts like a filter. Two people can face the same situation and experience completely different outcomes, simply because of how they interpret and respond to it. This matters a lot in everyday life. Think about stress. When you are stressed, small problems feel huge. You make worse decisions, say things you regret, and miss opportunities right in front of you. But when you are calm, even serious problems become manageable. The problem itself did not change. You did. That is transmutation in action. You took raw emotional material and transformed it into something useful. Instead of letting stress control you, you used awareness to change your response. A powerful real-world example of this comes from Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he explains that even in the worst conditions imaginable, people still had the freedom to choose their inner response. Some gave in to despair, while others found meaning and purpose, even in suffering. Frankl observed that those who could mentally transform their situation by finding meaning in it were more likely to survive. This mirrors the wisdom of the Emerald Tablet almost perfectly. External conditions were brutal and unchangeable, but internal transmutation changed everything. Another way to see this is in learning and failure. Many people see failure as proof they are not good enough. That belief turns failure into shame and fear, but others see failure as feedback. Same event, different interpretation. When you change how you frame an experience, you change its effect on you. That is not motivational fluff. That is mental alchemy. You are turning disappointment into information, and information into growth. The Emerald Tablet reminds us that transformation is not about escaping reality, but about understanding it deeply enough to work with it. You cannot turn lead into gold if you do not understand lead. Likewise, you cannot change your life if you refuse to look honestly at your thoughts, habits, and emotions. Transmutation starts with awareness. You notice what is happening inside you without judgment, then you consciously reshape it. So the next time you feel stuck, overwhelmed, or frustrated, instead of asking what is wrong with the world, try asking what state you are operating from. That simple shift in attention might be the first step in turning something heavy into something valuable. Not because life magically changes, but because you do. And that idea, written thousands of years ago on a mythical emerald tablet, is still quietly shaping lives today. Lost Teachings of Atlantis. Have you ever found yourself staring at your phone while waiting in line, scrolling endlessly, then suddenly thinking, how did humans go from living in caves to carrying tiny supercomputers in their pockets? It feels like progress jumped forward in giant leaps, almost like we skipped a few chapters in the story of history. Sometimes it even feels as if we are rediscovering things rather than inventing them for the first time. That strange feeling is exactly where today's story begins. Most of us grow up with a very simple idea of history. We are told that ancient people were primitive, struggled to survive, and slowly learned how to build tools, cities, and societies. We imagine them as less intelligent, less capable, and constantly guessing their way forward. Because of that mindset, we often overlook ancient myths, old stories, and strange artifacts as pure fantasy. We assume that if something sounds too advanced for its time, then it must be exaggerated or completely made up. That habit of brushing things off may be one of the biggest blind spots we have when looking at the past. This brings us to the idea of lost teachings of Atlantis and advanced ancient civilizations. Atlantis is often described as a powerful and highly developed civilization that existed long before recorded history. According to ancient accounts, especially those written by the Greek philosopher Plato, Atlantis was a society that mastered engineering, architecture, and knowledge in ways that sound shockingly modern. Some stories even suggest they understood energy, astronomy, and the natural world far better than we would expect. Whether Atlantis was a real place, a symbolic story, or a mix of both, the idea points to something bigger. It suggests that advanced knowledge may have existed in the past and was later lost due to disasters, floods, or the collapse of civilizations. Why does this idea matter today? Because it challenges how we see progress and intelligence. If ancient civilizations were more advanced than we give them credit for, then knowledge is not always a straight line moving forward. Sometimes knowledge is lost, forgotten, or buried under centuries of chaos. Think about how easily information disappears even today. Hard drives fail, websites vanish, and entire libraries can be wiped out by war or natural disasters. Now stretch that idea across thousands of years. Suddenly, the possibility of lost teachings does not sound so far-fetched. You can see this idea reflected in real life through ancient structures that still puzzle modern engineers. Massive stone blocks fitted together so tightly that even a razor blade cannot slide between them. Perfectly aligned monuments that track the movements of the stars. Cities built with drainage systems, road planning, and architectural precision that rival modern designs. These were not accidents. They required deep understanding, careful planning, and generations of shared knowledge. The question is not whether ancient people were capable. The question is how much they truly knew. One famous example often discussed is Plato's account of Atlantis itself. Plato wrote that Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophic flooding. After that, its knowledge disappeared beneath the sea. While many people dismiss this as fiction, others point out that Plato treated the story seriously, describing it as history passed down through Egyptian records. Interestingly, many ancient cultures across the world share flood myths, from Mesopotamia to India to the Americas. These shared stories hint that massive disasters may have erased entire chapters of human civilization. What makes this idea powerful is not just whether Atlantis existed, but what it teaches us about humility. It reminds us that modern society is not invincible. Knowledge can vanish if it is not protected, shared, and respected. It also encourages us to look at ancient wisdom with curiosity instead of arrogance. There may be lessons hidden in old texts, myths, and ruins that still apply today. Lessons about balance, sustainability, and the consequences of technological pride. In the end, the story of lost teachings and advanced ancient civilizations invites us to rethink what it means to be advanced. Progress is not just about faster machines or bigger cities. It is about understanding our place in history and recognizing that we might be standing on the shoulders of people who were far wiser than we ever imagined. The Kabbalistic Tree of Life. You know that moment when you wake up already tired, scroll your phone without thinking, rush through the day, and then suddenly it is nighttime again, and you ask yourself, what actually happened today? You were busy, you did things, you reacted to people, but somehow it all felt automatic, like you were on a moving walkway you never chose to step on. Most of us live days like that more often than we want to admit, and we quietly assume that this is just how reality works. The strange thing is that we often treat life as if it is random. We think emotions just happen, thoughts appear out of nowhere, success is luck, and suffering is bad timing. When something goes wrong, we blame the world. When something goes right, we rush past it without understanding why. We rarely stop to ask if there is a deeper structure behind all of this. We see the surface events, but ignore the hidden patterns that shape them. It is like trying to understand a city by only looking at traffic jams without ever noticing the roads underneath. This is where the Kabbalistic Tree of Life comes in, not as a religious object or a mystical decoration, but as a map of reality, of consciousness, and of how ideas turn into actions. In simple terms, the Tree of Life is a diagram that describes how something invisible becomes visible, how intention becomes thought, thought becomes emotion, emotion becomes behavior, and behavior becomes the world you experience. It is not about worship or magic. It is more like a psychological and philosophical blueprint that people have used for centuries to understand how reality unfolds from the inside out. The Tree of Life is made up of 10 stages, often called spheres, that represent different levels of experience. At the top are the most abstract things, like pure will and intention. These are the quiet impulses that push you to want something before you even know why. As you move downward, those impulses turn into thoughts, ideas, and plans. Then they become emotions, habits, and reactions. At the very bottom, everything solidifies into physical action and real-world consequences. In other words, your outer life is the final result of many inner steps you rarely notice. This matters because most people try to fix their lives at the bottom. They try to change habits without changing beliefs. They try to control emotions without understanding the thoughts that created them. They try to chase success without examining the intentions driving them. The Tree of Life quietly suggests something radical. If you want lasting change, you move upward, not downward. You look at the source, not just the outcome. When you understand where your actions come from, you gain the ability to reshape them. You can see this in everyday life. Think about someone who keeps sabotaging relationships. On the surface, it looks like bad luck or incompatible partners. But if you move upward on the Tree of Life, you might find fear of vulnerability. Then deeper still, a belief that love is unsafe, and even deeper, an unconscious decision made long ago to avoid pain at all costs. Suddenly the behavior makes sense. It is not random. It is structured. A famous real-world example that echoes this idea comes from psychology, especially cognitive behavioral therapy. Therapists discovered that changing surface behavior alone rarely works. Instead, lasting improvement happens when people identify underlying beliefs and thought patterns. When those inner structures change, emotions and behaviors follow naturally. The Tree of Life describes this same process, just in a symbolic and philosophical language developed long before modern psychology existed. Another powerful illustration comes from history. Many influential thinkers, artists, and leaders were known to spend long periods in reflection before taking action. They were not being lazy or mystical for no reason. They understood intuitively that clarity at the level of intention produces cleaner results in the physical world. The Tree of Life simply puts this intuition into a structured map, showing how clarity flows downward, and confusion does the same. Seen this way, the Kabbalistic Tree of Life stops being mysterious and starts being practical. It becomes a reminder that reality is not just happening to you, it is unfolding through you. Every reaction, decision, and outcome has a lineage. When you learn to trace that lineage, life becomes less chaotic and more meaningful. You may not control everything, but you gain something just as powerful: understanding. And with understanding comes the freedom to choose a different path next time the moving walkway tries to carry you somewhere you do not want to go. Mystery Schools of Egypt. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like something important was being talked about, but the conversation suddenly stopped the moment you arrived? Everyone smiles, changes the topic, and you are left thinking, okay, what did I just miss? That strange feeling of being just outside the circle is surprisingly close to how ancient knowledge worked thousands of years ago. Some people were allowed in, most were not, and the ones inside believed they were guarding secrets that could change how you see reality itself. Today, when we hear the word Egypt, we usually think of pyramids, mummies, and dusty museum displays. We think of history as something frozen in time. But what many people overlook is that ancient Egypt was not just about tombs and gods with animal heads. It was also home to secret schools of learning, where knowledge was not handed out freely. You had to earn it, and that idea feels strange to us now, because we are used to Googling everything in seconds. We assume that if information exists, everyone should have access to it. But for the ancient Egyptians, knowledge was power, responsibility, and even danger if misunderstood. This is where the mystery schools of Egypt come in. Despite the dramatic name, the basic idea is simple. These were sacred centers of learning, often connected to temples, where selected students were taught deeper truths about life, the mind, nature, and the universe. They were called mystery schools, not because the teachers were trying to be edgy, but because the teachings were meant to be experienced, not just explained. You did not just read a lesson. You lived it, practiced it, and proved you were ready for the next step. What made these schools different from normal education was initiation. Initiation was not just a ceremony or a ritual for show. It was a personal transformation. Think of it like leveling up in a video game, except the challenge was your own fear, ego, and ignorance. Students went through tests that pushed them physically, mentally, and emotionally. The goal was not to memorize facts. but to change how you understood yourself and the world. Knowledge without inner growth was considered useless or even dangerous. This matters more than it might seem at first. Even today, we struggle with the same issue. We have more information than any generation before us. Yet many people feel lost, anxious, or disconnected. The ancient Egyptians believed that wisdom had to be matched with character. Knowing how the world works meant nothing if you did not know how to control your impulses, your emotions, and your desires. In daily life, this shows up everywhere. Someone can be highly intelligent, but still make terrible decisions. Someone else may know fewer facts, but live with clarity and purpose. The mystery schools focused on creating the second type of person. One of the most famous stories connected to these initiations involves the Great Pyramid itself. According to later Greek writers who visited Egypt, advanced students were sometimes guided into dark chambers deep within temple complexes or pyramid structures. They would spend time alone in darkness and silence, facing fear, uncertainty, and their own thoughts. This was meant to simulate death and rebirth. When the student emerged, the idea was that they no longer feared death, because they understood life as something deeper than the physical body. Whether every detail of these stories is literally true or partly symbolic, the message is powerful. Transformation comes through experience, not comfort. Even philosophers like Plato later hinted that their own ideas were influenced by Egyptian teachings. He suggested that true knowledge was a kind of remembering, not just learning new information. That idea fits perfectly with the mystery school mindset. The initiation was not about giving you something new, but helping you uncover something already inside you. So when we talk about the mystery schools of Egypt, we are not just talking about ancient history or secret rituals. We are talking about a different way of thinking about growth, a reminder that wisdom is not about how much you know, but how deeply you understand. And maybe the real mystery is not what they were hiding back then, but why we stopped treating inner transformation as seriously as information itself. Alchemical quest for the Philosopher's Stone. Have you ever cleaned your room and suddenly felt like your life was a little more together, even though nothing else actually changed? Your bank account did not grow, your problems did not magically disappear, but somehow you felt lighter, clearer, more in control. That strange feeling, where something small and ordinary sparks a sense of inner upgrade, is closer to ancient alchemy than most people realize. And no, I am not talking about turning lead into gold in your kitchen, although that idea definitely played a role. Most of us grow up hearing about the Philosopher's Stone as a fantasy object, something from fairy tales, video games, or wizard stories. We usually think the whole thing was about greedy people trying to get rich forever or live forever without consequences. Because of that, we dismiss alchemy as outdated nonsense or mystical superstition. What we overlook is that many alchemists were not just obsessed with metals, they were obsessed with themselves. Their experiments were not only happening in glass flasks, but also in their own minds and habits, and that part gets ignored way too often. At its core, the alchemical quest for the Philosopher's Stone was about transformation, On the surface, alchemists talked about turning base metals into gold and discovering a substance that could heal all illness and grant long life. But underneath the symbols and strange language, they were describing a process of inner change. The philosopher's stone represented the perfected self, a state where chaos becomes order, confusion becomes clarity, and weakness becomes wisdom. Think of it less as a magic rock and more as a metaphor for becoming the best version of who you already are. This idea matters because people today are still chasing their own version of the philosopher's stone. We chase money, thinking it will fix our anxiety. We chase productivity hacks, thinking they will give us peace. We chase relationships, thinking they will make us whole. But just like the alchemists learned, changing the outside without working on the inside rarely works for long. The alchemical journey says that before you can turn anything into gold, you have to face the mess first. The doubts, the fears, the bad habits, the emotional clutter we would rather ignore. Real transformation is not glamorous. It starts with acknowledging what feels broken or unfinished. Alchemists described this journey in stages. First came a phase of breakdown, where old structures dissolve. This mirrors moments in life when things fall apart. A failed exam, a breakup, burnout, or realizing that the path you chose no longer fits. Instead of seeing this as failure, alchemy frames it as necessary. You cannot refine something without first breaking it down. Then comes purification, where you keep what matters and discard what does not. Over time, this leads to integration, where the scattered pieces come together into something stronger and more stable than before. One of the most fascinating examples comes from Carl Jung, the famous psychologist who studied alchemical texts deeply. Jung believed alchemy was an early language for psychology. He noticed that the symbols alchemists used matched the emotional and mental transformations people experience during personal growth. When someone confronts their shadow, their hidden fears and flaws, and slowly integrates them, that process mirrors the alchemical quest. Jung even suggested that the philosopher's stone symbolized psychological wholeness, not perfection, but balance. You can see this idea play out in everyday life. Think of someone who goes through a major setback, like losing a job. At first, everything feels dark and uncertain, but over time they reflect, learn new skills, rethink their values, and eventually build a life that fits them better than before. No gold appears on the table, but something more valuable emerges. Confidence, resilience, and self-knowledge. That is alchemy in action. The real power of the philosopher's stone story is not in magic, but in perspective. It reminds us that transformation is possible, but it requires patience, honesty, and effort. You cannot skip the uncomfortable parts. You cannot fake the process, and you cannot outsource it. The gold you are looking for is not something you find. It is something you become, one small, intentional step at a time. Naidan. Have you ever noticed how some days you wake up tired, even after a full night of sleep? Your coffee barely works, and everything feels slightly off, like your body and mind are not on the same team. You scroll your phone, stretch a little, maybe sigh for no clear reason, and think, Why am I already exhausted before the day even starts? It feels like your energy is leaking somewhere, and no amount of motivation videos or productivity hacks seems to plug the hole. Most of us are used to pushing through life like that. We chase energy from the outside. More caffeine, more sugar, more noise, more stimulation. When we feel empty, we look for something to fill us up. A new goal, a new habit, a new distraction. And when it does not work, we assume the problem is discipline, mindset, or willpower. We rarely stop to ask a deeper question. What if energy is not something you grab from the outside, but something you refine from within? This is where an old Taoist idea quietly steps in, something called internal alchemy, also known as Naidan. Despite how mysterious it sounds, it is actually a very down-to-earth way of understanding how humans work. Internal alchemy is a Taoist practice focused on transforming your inner energy so that your body, mind, and emotions work together instead of fighting each other. It is not about magic potions or immortality myths. At its core, it is about learning how to stop wasting your life force and start cultivating it. Think of your energy like money in a bank account. Most people only think about spending it. They spend energy worrying, rushing, multitasking, stressing, and reacting emotionally to everything. Internal alchemy flips the question. Instead of asking, how do I get more energy, it asks, how do I stop leaking it, and how do I let it mature into something more stable and powerful? Taoists believed that inside every person are raw materials that can be refined, much like turning crude oil into clean fuel. Why does this matter in real life? Because energy shapes everything. Your focus, your mood, your patience, and even how you speak to people are all reflections of your internal state. When your energy is scattered, life feels chaotic. You overthink small problems, snap at people you care about, and feel drained by simple tasks. But when your energy is calm and integrated, even stressful days feel manageable. You respond instead of react. You feel present instead of rushed. Internal alchemy is not about escaping the world. It is about meeting it with a stronger inner foundation. You can see echoes of this idea in modern science, even if the language is different. A famous example comes from research on mindfulness and emotional regulation. Studies from institutions like Harvard have shown that people who practice slow breathing, body awareness, and mental stillness experience lower stress hormones and improved emotional control. That is essentially internal alchemy in modern clothing. Taoists figured out long ago that when the breath is steady and the mind is quiet, the body enters a state where energy is conserved and refined instead of burned up. There is also a powerful historical story tied to this. Many Taoist sages lived remarkably simple lives, yet were known for clarity, resilience, and longevity. They were not chasing excitement. They were cultivating balance. One famous Taoist idea says that a candle that burns too brightly burns out quickly. A steady flame lasts longer and gives more light. Internal alchemy teaches you how to become that steady flame in a world obsessed with fireworks. In daily life, this might look like learning to pause before reacting, breathing deeply when emotions rise, or paying attention to how tension shows up in your body. Over time, those small shifts change how energy moves inside you. You feel less scattered, less reactive, more grounded, and strangely, more alive. The secret of internal alchemy is not hidden in a mountain cave or ancient scroll. It is hidden in plain sight, inside your breath, your attention, and how you treat your own energy. Once you stop leaking it everywhere, you realize you already had more than enough all along. Tantric use of sexual energy. Have you ever noticed how after a long day, when your energy is completely drained, even simple things feel harder than they should? You drop your keys, forget what you were about to say, and just want to lie down and scroll on your phone. Now here is the funny part. There are moments when the opposite happens. You feel charged up, confident, creative, and strangely powerful. Athletes talk about it. Artists feel it. Some people even notice it after falling deeply in love. That feeling of being switched on is not random, and ancient traditions noticed it long before modern science tried to explain it. Most people grow up learning that sexual energy is something to release as quickly as possible or to suppress out of guilt or shame. It is treated like a guilty pleasure or a biological itch that needs scratching. Once it is released, we move on and never think about it again. The problem is that this mindset makes us overlook something important. Sexual energy is not just about pleasure. It is one of the strongest forms of energy the human body can produce. When it is wasted unconsciously or pushed away entirely, people often feel tired, distracted, or emotionally flat without knowing why. This is where the idea of tantric use of sexual energy comes in. Tantra is not about wild rituals or secret bedroom techniques like social media often suggests. At its core, Tantra is simply about awareness and direction. Sexual energy is treated like fuel. You can burn it up quickly, or you can redirect it to power other parts of your life. In simple terms, Tantric practice teaches people to circulate sexual energy through the body instead of releasing it immediately. That energy can then support focus, emotional balance, creativity, and even spiritual growth. Think of sexual energy like a strong current of water. If it rushes out through a narrow channel, it is gone in seconds. But if you guide it through a system of canals, it can irrigate an entire field. In daily life, this means learning to slow down, breathe deeply, and feel energy move upward instead of outward. People practicing Tantra often focus on posture, breathing, and attention. Rather than chasing a peak moment, they stay present with the sensation and allow it to spread through the chest, spine, and head. Why does this matter in real life? Because many people are walking around chronically depleted. They rely on caffeine, sugar, or constant entertainment to feel alive. Tantric philosophy suggests that we already have a powerful internal source of vitality. When sexual energy is consciously directed, people report feeling calmer, yet more alert. Emotions become steadier, creative ideas flow more easily. Even relationships benefit, because intimacy becomes about connection rather than just release. A relatable example is how some people feel after a deep conversation or meaningful eye contact with someone they care about. There is no physical release involved, yet the energy feels intense and nourishing. Tantra works with that same principle, just more intentionally. Instead of letting desire pull attention outward, attention is brought inward and upward. There is also a fascinating real-world connection through the work of psychologist Abraham Maslow. He studied what he called peak experiences, moments of deep joy, clarity, and unity. Many people reported these experiences during creative work, meditation, or intense love. Interestingly, these moments often shared qualities similar to tantric states, where energy felt expansive rather than draining. While Maslow did not study Tantra directly, his observations support the idea that when human energy is integrated rather than fragmented, people experience greater fulfillment. Historically, tantric monks and yogis believed that sexual energy was the raw force behind spiritual awakening. They taught that this energy could either bind a person to endless craving or free them into deeper awareness, depending on how it was used. This was never about denial or indulgence, but about mastery. Just like fire can cook food or burn a house down, sexual energy can either exhaust or empower. The key takeaway is surprisingly simple. Sexual energy is not something to fear or waste. It is something to understand and guide. Tantra invites people to slow down, pay attention, and use this powerful force to support clarity, creativity, and inner strength. When approached with respect and awareness, what most people see as just desire becomes a doorway to deeper presence and personal power. The Tibetan Book of the Dead. Have you ever noticed how we spend a ridiculous amount of time preparing for things that might never happen, yet almost no time thinking about the one thing that is guaranteed for all of us? We plan careers, vacations, retirement, even what to watch next on a streaming app. But when it comes to death, most people treat it like an awkward guest at a party. We avoid it, joke about it, or pretend it is far away, even though it quietly follows all of us like a shadow that never clocks out. Most people live as if death is something that only matters at the very last moment. The common mindset is that dying is a purely medical event. You go to a hospital, machines beep, doctors do their best, and then it is over. What happens inside the mind during dying is rarely discussed. Even thinking about it can feel uncomfortable, gloomy, or superstitious. So we distract ourselves. We scroll, work, stress, and stay busy. The problem is that by ignoring death, we also ignore a huge part of what it means to be alive. And that is where many people feel lost, anxious, or unprepared when loss actually hits. This is where an ancient text called the Tibetan Book of the Dead comes in. Despite its dramatic name, this book is not meant to be scary. It is more like a guidebook. In simple terms, it is a set of instructions read to someone who is dying or who has just died, meant to guide their consciousness through the process of death. The original idea is that death is not an instant switch that flips off. Instead, it is a transition, almost like waking up from one dream and entering another. The book explains how the mind experiences different stages during this transition, and how awareness can help navigate it calmly instead of being overwhelmed. The idea of conscious dying is at the heart of this teaching. Conscious dying means being mentally aware, calm, and present during the process of death. Instead of panicking or clinging to fear, the person is encouraged to recognize what is happening and let go gently. This might sound abstract, but it is actually very practical. Think about how different it feels to fall asleep peacefully versus passing out from exhaustion and stress. The teaching suggests that death works in a similar way. The state of your mind matters a lot. Why does this matter for everyday life when most of us are not facing death right now? Because the way we relate to death shapes the way we live. People who accept impermanence often stress less about small problems. They argue less, forgive more easily, and appreciate moments more deeply. Conscious dying also changes how people deal with grief. Instead of seeing death as a total disappearance, it becomes a transformation. This does not remove sadness, but it gives it meaning and softness rather than shock and confusion. A powerful real-world example of this idea can be seen in hospice care today. Many hospice workers have noticed that patients who talk openly about death and accept it tend to pass more peacefully. Their breathing is calmer, their bodies relax, and their final moments are often described as gentle. Some families even report that their loved one seemed aware, present, and emotionally settled at the very end. While modern science explains this partly through reduced stress and fear, the Tibetan teachings have been saying something similar for centuries. Awareness changes experience. There is also a well-known story often shared by teachers of this text about monks who practiced preparing for death daily. When death finally came, they were not surprised or terrified. It was familiar, not because they wanted to die, but because they had made peace with the idea long before it arrived. That preparation did not make their lives darker. It made them more alive, more compassionate, and more focused on what truly mattered. In the end, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not really about dying. It is about learning how to let go. Letting go of fear, control, and the illusion that things last forever. Conscious dying teaches us something surprisingly hopeful. If we learn how to face endings with awareness, we also learn how to live beginnings with more clarity, and maybe, just maybe, thinking about death a little more can help us waste less time being afraid of living. The Orphic Mysteries. Have you ever woken up from a dream that felt a little too real, like you were somewhere else, living another life, and for a few seconds after waking up, you could not tell where you really were? Or maybe you have had one of those moments where you look at your life and think, why does it feel like I have been here before, learning the same lessons again and again? We usually laugh it off, grab our phone, scroll for a bit, and move on. But thousands of years ago, some people took that feeling very seriously. They believed it was not just a feeling, but a clue. Most of us live as if this life is a straight line. You are born, you grow up, you work, you get tired, and then that is it. When something bad happens, we either blame bad luck or say life is unfair. When something good happens, we say we were blessed or lucky. But we rarely stop to ask deeper questions like, why am I here? Or what if life is not just one long story, but a chapter in a much bigger book? This way of thinking is so common that anything outside of it feels strange or unrealistic, and that is exactly why the ideas behind the Orphic mysteries feel so surprising, even today. The Orphic mysteries were an ancient spiritual tradition from Greece, named after Orpheus, a legendary poet and musician. According to the stories, Orpheus could charm animals, move stones, and even travel to the underworld with his music. But the heart of the Orphic mysteries was not about magic tricks or myths. It was about the soul. The Orphic followers believed that the human soul was divine, meaning it came from something sacred and eternal. The problem, they said, was that the soul was trapped inside the body, like a spark of light locked inside a heavy shell. According to Orphic belief, life did not end with death. Instead, the soul went through a cycle of rebirth. When a person died, their soul did not disappear. It moved on, eventually entering another body, and another life began. This cycle kept repeating over and over again. Why? Because the soul needed purification. Every life was seen as a chance to learn, to clean itself from past mistakes, and to move closer to its original divine state. In simple terms, life was not a test you took once. It was more like a class you had to repeat until you truly understood the lesson. This idea mattered deeply because it changed how people lived their daily lives. If you believed your actions would follow your soul into another life, then what you did today really mattered. Kindness was not just about being nice. It was about freeing your soul. Greed, violence, and selfishness were not just bad habits. They were chains that kept your soul stuck in the cycle. This is why Orphic followers practiced rituals, lived disciplined lives, and even avoided eating meat. They believed that every choice either helped the soul rise or dragged it back down. You can actually see a version of this idea playing out in real life today. Think about people who seem to repeat the same patterns over and over. They choose the same unhealthy relationships, make the same mistakes with money, or fall into the same destructive habits. We often say they are stuck in a cycle. The Orphic mysteries took that idea and extended it beyond one lifetime. They believed the universe itself remembered your choices, and those choices shaped the life you were born into next. One powerful example of Orphic belief comes from ancient burial practices. Some Orphic followers were buried with small gold tablets. These tablets had instructions written on them, guiding the soul in the afterlife. They reminded the soul of who it truly was and warned it not to forget its divine origin. This shows how real and practical these beliefs were to the people who followed them. They were not just abstract ideas. They were instructions for the journey of the soul itself. Whether or not you believe in reincarnation, the Orphic mysteries leave us with a thought that still hits home. What if your life is not just about surviving, earning money, or passing time? What if it is about becoming something better, step by step, choice by choice? Even without believing in another life, that idea alone can change how you treat others, how you face struggles, and how seriously you take the person you are becoming. And maybe that strange feeling you get sometimes, the sense that life is repeating itself is not so strange after all. The cult of Mithras. Have you ever noticed how people love being part of something secret, even if it is just a private group chat or a members-only gym? The moment something feels exclusive, it suddenly feels more important. A door with a lock feels more interesting than an open one. Now imagine living in ancient Rome, walking through busy streets full of noise, soldiers, merchants, and temples everywhere. Somewhere beneath your feet, hidden from the public eye, people are gathering in candle-lit rooms, performing strange rituals, swearing oaths, and sharing secrets that outsiders are never allowed to hear. That feeling of mystery, belonging, and secrecy is exactly where our story begins. Most of us think ancient religions were simple. We picture big temples, public sacrifices, and priests chanting while everyone watches. That image is not wrong, but it is incomplete. What people often overlook is how deeply humans crave meaning, identity, and brotherhood. Especially in stressful times, people want to feel chosen, protected, and part of something bigger than themselves. When life feels chaotic or unfair, a hidden group with secret knowledge can feel comforting. This is something we still see today in clubs, fraternities, and even online communities. We rarely stop to ask why secret groups have always been so attractive, or what they actually offered to the people inside them. This is where the cult of Mithras comes in. The cult of Mithras was a secret religious group that existed during the Roman Empire, especially among soldiers. Mithras was a god associated with strength, loyalty, and cosmic order. Unlike public Roman religions, this cult did not allow everyone to join. You could not just walk in and say you were interested. Membership required initiation, secrecy, and commitment. Their meeting places were usually underground, often carved into caves or built to look like them. These spaces were dark, enclosed, and symbolic, meant to separate members from the outside world and prepare them mentally for transformation. The initiation rites were at the heart of the cult. When someone joined, they did not simply learn beliefs. They went through stages, each one representing growth, discipline, and deeper understanding. These stages were like levels in a game, except much more intense and symbolic. Initiates were tested physically and mentally. They might experience darkness, loud sounds, symbolic dangers, or rituals that challenged fear and trust. The goal was not harm, but rebirth. After initiation, members believed they were no longer the same person they were before. They were brothers, bonded by shared secrets and trials. This mattered a lot in real life, especially for Roman soldiers. Military life was brutal, uncertain, and filled with danger. Being part of the cult of Mithras gave soldiers a sense of stability and purpose. It reinforced values like loyalty, courage, and obedience. When a soldier knew the man beside him had gone through the same secret trials, trust came naturally. This bond could mean the difference between panic and discipline on the battlefield. Beyond war, the cult also offered meaning. It suggested that life followed a cosmic order, and that through discipline and loyalty, one could align with it. A powerful historical clue to how important this cult was comes from archaeology. Across the former Roman Empire, from Britain to the Middle East, archaeologists discovered underground temples called Mithraea. Almost all of them share the same layout. A narrow entrance, benches along the sides, and at the far end, an image of Mithras killing a bull. This scene was not random. It symbolized sacrifice, renewal, and the cycle of life. The fact that these temples look so similar tells us something important. This was not a loose belief system. It was organized, structured, and taken very seriously by its followers. One story that really brings this to life comes from the simple detail that women were not allowed to join. This tells us the cult was focused on a specific identity, mainly male and often military. It was not about spreading widely, but about strengthening those inside. That exclusivity made it powerful. When Christianity later spread and offered open membership to everyone, it slowly replaced cults like Mithras. But the psychological appeal never disappeared. Even today, we see how initiation, shared struggle, and secrecy can create intense loyalty. So when we talk about the cult of Mithras and its underground initiation rites, we are not just talking about an ancient religion. We are talking about a very human desire, the desire to belong, the desire to be transformed, and the desire to feel that you are part of something hidden, meaningful, and bigger than yourself. That desire has shaped history, and it still shapes us today, even if the rituals look a little different now. Zoroastrian dualism. Have you ever noticed how some days feel like everything just clicks? Your coffee tastes right, traffic behaves, and people seem kinder, while other days feel like the universe woke up and chose chaos. You drop your phone, your internet slows down at the worst moment, and suddenly even small problems feel 10 times heavier. It almost feels like there is an invisible tug-of-war happening behind the scenes, pulling your day in one direction or the other. Funny enough, this feeling of light versus dark, good versus bad, is something humans have been thinking about for thousands of years. Most of us go through life without really stopping to question this contrast. We talk about good days and bad days, good people and bad people, right choices and wrong choices. But we rarely ask where this way of thinking comes from. We often assume it is just human nature. We accept that life is a mix of blessings and struggles and move on. What we overlook is that some ancient cultures did not just notice this contrast, they built entire worldviews around it. And one of the earliest and most influential of these ideas comes from a very old belief system that still quietly shapes how we think today. This brings us to Zoroastrian dualism and the cosmic battle of light and dark. Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest known religions in the world, originating in ancient Persia thousands of years ago. At its core is a simple but powerful idea. The universe is shaped by a struggle between two opposing forces. One represents truth, goodness, and light. The other represents lies, destruction, and darkness. These forces are not just symbols or metaphors. In Zoroastrian thought, they are real influences that affect the world and human choices every single day. What makes this idea so relatable is how personal it feels. In this worldview, humans are not passive observers watching a cosmic drama from the sidelines. Every thought, word, and action is part of this battle. When you choose honesty over lying, kindness over cruelty, or responsibility over laziness, you are siding with light. When you choose deception, harm, or selfishness, you strengthen darkness. Life becomes meaningful because even small choices matter. Your everyday decisions are not just personal. They are cosmic. This concept matters because it gives people a sense of responsibility and purpose. Instead of seeing suffering as random or meaningless, Zoroastrian dualism frames it as part of an ongoing struggle that will eventually be resolved. Good does not just exist quietly in the background. It actively resists evil. And humans have a role to play in that resistance. This way of thinking encourages moral clarity. It pushes people to ask not just what benefits me, but what helps the world move toward truth and order. You can see echoes of this idea everywhere today. Think about superhero movies where heroes fight villains who represent chaos or corruption. Think about phrases like fighting the good fight or being on the right side of history. Even modern ideas about ethical responsibility, justice, and accountability carry traces of this ancient worldview. The belief that good and evil are real forces and that choosing good matters beyond personal gain did not appear out of nowhere. One powerful historical example of Zoroastrian dualism in action comes from how ancient Persian rulers governed. Many kings believed they were responsible for promoting truth and order in society. Laws, social structures, and even architecture were designed to reflect harmony and balance. The idea was that a just ruler strengthened the force of light, while a corrupt ruler invited chaos and darkness. Leadership was not just political, it was moral and cosmic. Even on a personal level, this worldview can feel surprisingly modern. Think about someone trying to break a bad habit. Every day feels like a battle between the part of them that wants comfort and the part that wants growth. Zoroastrianism would say this struggle is not weakness. It is proof that your choices matter. The fight itself is meaningful. In the end, the cosmic battle of light and dark is not just an ancient story. It is a lens through which people have tried to understand life, responsibility, and hope. It reminds us that goodness is not automatic, and darkness does not disappear on its own, but it also offers something comforting. No matter how small your actions seem, choosing truth and kindness is never wasted. In this ancient view of the universe, every good choice lights a candle against the dark. Ancient shamanic soul, travel. Have you ever woken up from a dream so vivid that for a few seconds you were not sure if you were still asleep or already awake? Maybe you were flying, meeting someone who felt incredibly real, or visiting a place that does not exist on any map. You shake your head, grab your phone, and think, that was weird. Then you go on with your day, brushing it off as just a dream. But for thousands of years, many cultures around the world would have looked at that experience and said, no, that was not just a dream. That was a journey. Most of us today are trained to treat reality as only what we can touch, measure, and post online. If it does not show up on a screen or a scan, we assume it is not real or not important. When people hear words like shaman, spirit world, or soul travel, they often picture fantasy movies, superstition, or something disconnected from modern life. The usual reaction is either curiosity mixed with skepticism or outright dismissal. We think, that sounds interesting, but it cannot possibly have anything to do with me paying bills, dealing with stress, or figuring out my life. And because of that mindset, we overlook a huge part of how humans have understood consciousness and meaning for most of history. Ancient shamanic soul travel is the belief that a person can intentionally journey beyond the physical body to explore non-physical realms, often called spirit worlds. In simple terms, shamans believed that consciousness was not locked inside the brain. Instead, they saw the soul as something that could move, explore, and interact with other layers of reality. Through practices like rhythmic drumming, chanting, fasting, or deep meditation, shamans would enter an altered state of awareness. In that state, they believed they could travel to other worlds to gain knowledge, healing, or guidance for their community. Think of it less like teleportation and more like tuning a radio to a different station that was always there, but usually drowned out by noise. These spirit worlds were not random dreamscapes. Many traditions described them in structured ways. There was often an upper world associated with wisdom, ancestors, or higher insight, a middle world connected to everyday life but hidden layers of it, and a lower world often linked to instinct, animals, and deep emotional truths. The shaman acted like a bridge between these realms, bringing back insights to help with illness, emotional pain, lost purpose, or big decisions. In a way, they were the original therapists, storytellers, and spiritual guides rolled into one. Why does this matter today? Because even if you do not believe in literal spirit worlds, the core idea touches something very real in modern life. People feel disconnected, anxious, and lost, even when they have more comfort and technology than ever. We scroll endlessly, but we rarely feel fulfilled. Shamanic soul travel was a structured way of listening inward, exploring the subconscious, and finding meaning beyond surface-level thinking. It acknowledged that humans are not just bodies that work and consume, but inner worlds filled with symbols, emotions, and intuition. You can see echoes of this everywhere. Athletes talk about being in the zone. Artists describe ideas coming from somewhere beyond them. People who meditate deeply report powerful inner journeys that feel more real than ordinary thought. Even modern psychology recognizes the value of exploring inner landscapes through guided imagery and altered states of awareness. The language has changed, but the human experience has not. One famous example often discussed is how indigenous shamans in the Amazon used rhythmic sound and ritual to enter trance states and diagnose illness. They believed sickness was not just physical, but could be caused by spiritual imbalance or loss of soul essence. When Western researchers first encountered these practices, they dismissed them. But later studies showed that some of these rituals produced measurable psychological and emotional healing effects, even when no physical medicine was involved. The story here is not about proving spirit worlds exist in a scientific sense, but about recognizing that ancient cultures understood the mind and human experience in ways we are still rediscovering today. So the next time you have a vivid dream, a sudden insight, or a moment where you feel deeply connected to something larger than yourself. Remember that for most of human history, that experience was seen as a journey worth listening to. Ancient shamanic soul travel reminds us that reality might be bigger, deeper, and more mysterious than our daily routines suggest. And sometimes the answers we are looking for are not out there in the noise, but waiting quietly within. The Pythagorean Doctrine. Have you ever noticed how some songs just feel right, even if you cannot explain why? You might be washing dishes, riding a jeepney, or scrolling late at night, and suddenly a melody hits that feels balanced, calm, and oddly satisfying. Meanwhile, another sound might feel noisy or irritating, even if it is not that loud. What if I told you that more than 2,000 years ago, someone believed this feeling had nothing to do with taste or mood, but everything to do with numbers? Most of us go through life treating numbers as boring tools. We use them for grades, prices, passwords, or deadlines, and that is about it. Music is music. Art is art. The universe is just the universe. Numbers stay in math class, and harmony stays in playlists. That separation feels natural, but it is also exactly where many people miss something fascinating. We often overlook the idea that patterns repeat everywhere, from the sounds we love to the way the world seems strangely ordered. Because numbers feel abstract and cold, we rarely think of them as something spiritual, beautiful, or deeply connected to life itself. This is where the Pythagorean doctrine of sacred numbers and harmony comes in. Pythagoras was not just someone who cared about triangles. He believed that numbers were the hidden structure of reality. To him and his followers, numbers were not invented by humans. They were discovered. The universe, according to this view, was built on numerical relationships, and harmony happened when those relationships were simple and balanced. In other words, the world made sense because numbers made it make sense. The most famous example comes from music. Pythagoras noticed that when you pluck strings of different lengths, some combinations sound pleasant, while others sound harsh. When the string lengths had simple ratios, like one string being exactly half the length of another, the sound felt harmonious. When the ratios were messy, the sound felt chaotic. From this he concluded something bold. Harmony was not subjective. It followed numerical order. Music was not just art. It was math you could hear. This idea went far beyond music. The Pythagoreans believed that the same numerical harmony governed the movement of planets, the structure of nature, and even the human soul. They talked about the music of the spheres, the idea that celestial bodies moved according to mathematical ratios, creating a kind of cosmic music that we could not hear but could feel through the order of the universe. To them, living well meant aligning your life with harmony, balance, and proportion. Why does this matter today? Because even now we are surrounded by the same principles, whether we notice them or not. Architects use proportions to make buildings feel stable and beautiful. Too much imbalance and the structure feels uncomfortable. In music production, certain chord progressions feel resolved because they follow predictable patterns. Even in daily life, we talk about balance all the time. Work-life balance, emotional balance, financial balance. We instinctively chase harmony, even if we do not use mathematical language to describe it. There is also something deeply human about this idea. When life feels chaotic, what we usually want is not randomness. We want things to make sense again. The Pythagorean mindset suggests that order is not something we force onto the world. It is something we tune into, like adjusting an instrument until the sound becomes clear. That idea can be comforting. It suggests that meaning is not invented out of nothing. It is discovered through alignment. A famous historical moment that reflects this thinking is how ancient Greek education treated music, mathematics, and philosophy as connected subjects. Students did not study numbers just to calculate. They studied them to understand beauty, ethics, and the structure of reality. For them, learning mathematics was a moral and spiritual exercise. To understand harmony in numbers was to understand harmony in yourself. Even modern science quietly echoes this idea. Physicists describe the universe using elegant equations, and they often talk about beauty and simplicity as signs that a theory might be true. That instinct, the feeling that simple relationships are more real, is very Pythagorean at heart. So the next time a song gives you chills, or a pattern feels satisfying, or balance brings you peace, remember this. Long ago, someone believed that was not an accident. According to the Pythagorean doctrine, you are not just enjoying a moment. You are brushing up against the hidden harmony of the universe, written quietly in the language of numbers. Esoteric, Buddhism. Have you ever noticed how you can sit through the same advice again and again, read the same book, hear the same quote, and yet one random moment hits you differently, and suddenly everything clicks? It is like hearing a song you have heard 100 times, then one day the lyrics suddenly make sense because of something you are going through. You did not get new information. You got a new understanding. That strange moment of clicking is a great doorway into today's topic. Most of us are used to learning in a very surface-level way. We read, we listen, we collect facts, and we move on. When it comes to spirituality or wisdom traditions, we often expect clear instructions, step-by-step rules, or inspirational quotes we can post and forget. Many people approach Buddhism this way too. They hear about meditation, kindness, or letting go of desire, and think that is all there is. Useful ideas, yes, but something still feels missing. People practice for years and still feel stuck, distracted, or unchanged deep down. It can feel like knowing the map, but never actually walking the road. This is where the idea often called the secret oral teachings of the Buddha comes in, sometimes known as Esoteric Buddhism. The word secret here does not mean hidden in a conspiracy sense or locked away from everyone. It simply means teachings that are not fully understood through words alone. These teachings were meant to be transmitted through direct experience, personal guidance, and practice rather than just reading texts. Think of it like learning how to swim. You can read 10 books about swimming, but until you get into the water, the real lesson has not begun. At its core, Esoteric Buddhism focuses on transformation from the inside out. Instead of just understanding ideas about reality, it trains you to experience reality differently. The teachings use tools like visualization, sound, breathing, posture, and symbolic rituals to reshape how the mind perceives the world. The goal is not to escape life, but to see clearly within it. In simple terms, it teaches that enlightenment is not something far away or reserved for monks on mountains. It is something that can be cultivated here and now, through how you think, speak, act, and even how you experience your own body. This matters more than most people realize, because our daily suffering often comes from automatic patterns. We react before we think. We get angry, anxious, or insecure without knowing why. Esoteric practices aim to interrupt these patterns at their root. Instead of fighting thoughts, they work with the deeper layers of the mind. For example, when you chant a sound or visualize an image repeatedly, it slowly changes your emotional and mental habits. Over time, this can make compassion feel more natural, focus more stable, and fear less overwhelming. It is not magic. It is training, much like building muscle through repetition. A powerful real-world example comes from the spread of these teachings in ancient Asia. A young monk once traveled across dangerous seas to learn methods that were not written down in books. His teacher did not give long lectures. Instead, he taught through direct demonstration, ritual practice, and personal correction. When the monk returned home, he taught that enlightenment could be realized in this very body, in this very lifetime. This idea was radical at the time. People did not need to wait for future lives or distant heavens. Practice itself was the awakening. That message inspired generations and shaped entire cultures. Modern science gives us an interesting parallel. Studies on mindfulness and meditation show that repeated mental practices physically change the brain. Areas linked to attention, emotional regulation, and empathy become stronger. This supports the ancient idea that wisdom is not just knowledge, but embodied experience. You do not just believe differently, you become different. The secret oral teachings remind us of something simple but profound. Truth is not only something you hear, it is something you live. Words can point the way, but they are not the destination. Real change happens when understanding moves from the head to the heart and into everyday action. And maybe that is why, every now and then, a familiar idea suddenly clicks. It was not new. You were. The hidden teachings of Jesus. Have you ever noticed how some advice sticks with you forever, while other advice just slides right off your brain like water on glass? You hear it, you nod politely, and then 5 minutes later you are back to stressing out about the same things. Now here is a strange thought. What if some of the most powerful teachings ever shared were never meant to be taken only at face value? What if they were designed to be lived quietly, practiced daily, and understood slowly, like a secret recipe passed down in whispers rather than shouted from a stage? A lot of people today think they already understand the message of Jesus. Love others. Be kind. Forgive. Do not be selfish. And while all of that is true, many people stop there. They see these teachings as moral rules rather than tools for inner change. Others get overwhelmed by religious debates, doctrines, and labels, and end up tuning everything out. The result is that something deeply practical gets turned into something distant and abstract. It feels holy, but not always useful when life gets messy, stressful, or painful. This is where the Nazarene and Essene perspective becomes fascinating. During the time of Jesus, there were Jewish groups who focused less on power and ritual and more on inner purity, simplicity, and direct experience of God. The Essenes were one of these groups. They lived simple lives, practiced discipline, valued silence, and believed that real transformation happened from the inside out. When people talk about the Nazarene aspect of Jesus, they are pointing to his role as a teacher who emphasized inner awakening, not just outward obedience. In simple terms, these hidden teachings are not about secret spells or forbidden knowledge. They are about how a person thinks, feels, and lives on a daily basis. They suggest that the kingdom of God is not something you wait for after death, but something you experience when your inner world changes. When Jesus talked about light, truth, rebirth, and the heart, he was often pointing inward. He was saying that peace does not come from fixing the world first, but from aligning yourself with what is good, honest, and whole inside you. This matters a lot more than it might seem at first. Think about how many problems in life come from inner chaos, stress, anger, envy, fear, the constant feeling that you are not enough or that something is missing. The Essene style of thinking suggests that when your inner life is disordered, your outer life follows. But when your inner life becomes calm and clear, your actions naturally become kinder, wiser, and more grounded. This turns morality into a byproduct of awareness rather than a forced rule. You can see this play out in everyday life. When someone is truly at peace, they do not need to prove themselves. They listen better. They react less. They forgive more easily, not because they are weak, but because they are not controlled by their emotions. This reflects many sayings attributed to Jesus, like the idea that a good tree produces good fruit. The focus is not on forcing good behavior, but on becoming the kind of person from whom good behavior naturally flows. There is also a powerful historical example that brings this idea to life. The Essene community near the Dead Sea lived in shared spaces, practiced regular reflection, and believed that spiritual cleanliness mattered more than social status. They washed not just to clean the body, but to symbolize inner renewal. When John the Baptist spoke about repentance and inner change, his message closely echoed this mindset. Jesus then took these ideas further, bringing them out of isolated communities and into daily human relationships. One story that captures this well is the teaching about loving your enemy. On the surface, it sounds unrealistic, but from an inner transformation point of view, it makes sense. Holding hatred hurts the person, holding it more than the target. Letting go frees your own mind. That is not just a moral command. It is psychological wisdom. Modern studies on forgiveness and stress now show what these ancient teachings hinted at long ago. Inner peace directly affects mental and physical health. In the end, the Nazarene and Essene-inspired teachings invite you to stop treating spirituality like a checklist and start treating it like an inner practice. They suggest that truth is not something you only believe, but something you become. And maybe that is why these teachings still feel alive today. They do not demand perfection. They invite awareness. And once you see that, the message stops being ancient history and starts becoming something you can actually live. The Sumerian tablets. Have you ever looked at your phone after a long day, scrolled through social media, and suddenly wondered how we went from cave paintings to touchscreen glass slabs in what feels like the blink of an eye? 1 minute humans are figuring out fire, and the next minute we are launching satellites and arguing with strangers online about pineapple on pizza. That jump feels almost suspiciously fast, like someone skipped a few chapters in the instruction manual of humanity. Most of us grow up with a very simple story of human origins. We are told that humans slowly evolved, learned to farm, built cities, and eventually created civilization through trial and error. And for the most part, that story works. But here is the thing. Very few people ever stop to ask why the earliest civilizations seemed to appear so suddenly, already packed with advanced knowledge. Writing systems, astronomy, mathematics, law, architecture. It is like humanity went from zero to sophisticated society without warming up first. Because we are used to hearing the same explanation over and over, we rarely question whether there might be more layers to the story. This is where the Sumerian tablets enter the picture. These tablets are ancient clay records created by the Sumerians, one of the earliest known civilizations, living in Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. Think of them as the hard drives of the ancient world. Instead of storing cat videos, they recorded myths, laws, star charts, and stories about gods. What makes these tablets fascinating is not just their age, but what they claim. Some of these texts describe beings called the Anunnaki, powerful figures said to have come from the heavens who played a role in creating or modifying humanity. According to certain interpretations of these tablets, humans were not just a happy accident of nature. Instead, they were engineered. The story goes that the Anunnaki needed workers to mine resources, so they combined their own essence with existing life on Earth to create humans. In simple terms, humanity was designed to work. Whether you take this literally or symbolically, the idea itself is what captures people's imagination. It suggests that our intelligence, curiosity, and even our tendency to build complex systems might not be random at all. Why does this idea matter today? Because it changes how people see themselves. If humans were engineered, even as a metaphor, it raises deep questions about purpose and identity. Why do we feel such a strong drive to build, explore, and push limits? Why are humans obsessed with progress, productivity, and control over nature? You see this in everyday life when people feel restless without goals, careers, or something to improve. It is almost like we are hardwired to do more than just survive. You can see this mindset everywhere, in the way societies value hard work, in the pressure to be useful, in the guilt people feel when they are not productive. Whether or not ancient beings actually engineered humanity, the Sumerian stories reflect a truth about how early humans understood themselves. They saw humanity as created with intention, not randomness. That belief alone can shape behavior across generations. A famous real-world example that keeps this debate alive is the discovery of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories ever written, found on Sumerian tablets. This epic talks about gods, divine intervention, and a great flood story that closely resembles later religious texts. What shocked historians was not just the similarities, but how detailed and complex the story already was for such an early civilization. It showed that the Sumerians were not primitive thinkers. They were philosophers, observers of the stars, and deep storytellers trying to explain their place in the universe. Whether you believe the Sumerian tablets describe literal ancient astronauts or symbolic myths meant to teach moral lessons, one thing is clear. Our ancestors were asking the same questions we ask today. Where did we come from? Why are we here? And are we alone in all of this? The idea that humanity might have engineered origins taps into something deeply human, our desire to believe that our existence has meaning, design, and purpose beyond pure chance. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by the speed of modern life, or wonder why humans seem driven to constantly build and improve, remember this. Long before smartphones and skyscrapers, ancient people were already wrestling with the idea that humanity might be more than just an accident, and whether myth or mystery, that question still echoes loudly today. The Book of Enoch. Have you ever wondered why some ideas feel forbidden, like knowledge you were never supposed to touch, yet everyone secretly wants to peek at it anyway? It is like that moment when someone says, "Do not press this button," and suddenly pressing the button becomes the only thing on your mind. We laugh about it, but curiosity has a funny way of pulling us toward things that feel hidden or off-limits. And when it comes to ancient stories, few are more mysterious or eyebrow-raising than a strange book that talks about angels breaking rules and teaching humans secrets they were never meant to know. Most people grow up hearing simplified versions of biblical stories. Angels are good, demons are bad, and everything is pretty clean and tidy. But what many people do not realize is that there were ancient writings floating around that did not make it into the Bible most people read today. Because of that, a lot of us assume that anything outside the familiar stories must be fake, exaggerated, or just ancient fantasy. Others go in the opposite direction and treat these texts like secret truth manuals that explain everything wrong with the world. Both sides usually miss something important, which is the deeper message behind the story. This is where the Book of Enoch comes in. In simple terms, the Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish text that expands on a very short and mysterious passage from the Book of Genesis. Genesis briefly mentions beings called Watchers, angels who came down to earth, took human wives, and produced giant offspring known as the Nephilim. The Book of Enoch takes that tiny reference and turns it into a full story. It describes these angels not just as rule breakers, but as teachers who shared forbidden knowledge with humanity. According to the Book of Enoch, these fallen angels taught humans things like metalworking, weapon-making, astrology, cosmetics, enchantments, and the reading of signs in the heavens. On the surface, some of that sounds harmless or even helpful. After all, Technology and knowledge are what move civilization forward. But the story frames these teachings as dangerous because humanity was not ready for them. The knowledge came without wisdom, discipline, or moral responsibility, and that imbalance caused chaos, violence, and corruption to spread across the world. This idea matters because it mirrors something we still struggle with today. We live in an age where information spreads instantly. Anyone can learn almost anything in seconds. But just because knowledge is available does not mean it is safe or used wisely. Think about social media, artificial intelligence, or powerful technologies. These tools are not evil on their own, but when they spread faster than our ability to use them responsibly, problems appear. The Book of Enoch is not just talking about angels and giants, it is warning about what happens when power grows faster than character. The story also challenges how we think about good and evil. The fallen angels are not portrayed as cartoon villains twirling mustaches. They start with desire, curiosity, and pride. Very human traits, even though they are not human. That makes the story uncomfortable, because it suggests that destruction does not always come from obvious evil, but from good things taken too far or used at the wrong time. A fascinating historical detail is that the Book of Enoch was widely read and respected by early Jewish communities and even early Christians. Fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which tells us it was taken seriously by ancient readers. Some early Christian writers quoted it directly. Over time, it was excluded from most biblical canons, not because it was unknown, but because it raised complex theological questions that were hard to reconcile. One powerful example from the story is the punishment of the Watchers. They are bound and cast into darkness, forced to watch the destruction their actions caused. It is not just punishment for breaking rules, it is a lesson about responsibility. If you introduce something into the world, you are accountable for its consequences. That idea hits close to home today, especially when we think about leaders, inventors, and influencers who shape how millions of people think and act. So when people talk about the Book of Enoch and forbidden arts, it is easy to get lost in debates about giants, angels, and ancient mysteries. But at its core, the story asks a timeless question. Just because we can do something, should we? And what happens when curiosity outruns wisdom? That question mattered thousands of years ago, and it might matter even more now. So which of these ancient teachings resonated with you the most, or felt strangely familiar in a way you cannot quite explain? Maybe you have encountered a truth we did not even mention. Or maybe it was something so subtle, so unsettling, that it felt as if it was meant only for you, a quiet realization. History never fully wrote down. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and let others follow you as the trail descends deeper into the forbidden.